Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the head of marketing at InfoTools. Today, we're joined by Jason Jacobson, Director of Consumer Insight at Woodside Homes. Thanks for joining us on the show, Jason.
Hey, Michael, thanks so much for having me. It's been a real honor to get the opportunity to speak with you. I've followed the podcast religiously on LinkedIn, so it's great to have an opportunity to chat and connect with you.
Thank you. Great to hear the feedback. So, Jason, what's the most significant thing you're going to share with us today?
Yeah, I might be an N of one and I might get shot down in my industry, but less data is actually better. We are just inundated by data and dashboards and information, and we're literally drowning in data. And I have actually found that having less data and going deeper is much better. And it really helps us from an insights profession to have the old adage, less is more.
Well, it's not something that you hear every day. Normally, it's the opposite. Like, we need to be more data-driven. We need data. It has to inform our decisions. Yes, so normally I'd give a bit of an intro at the start of the podcast to give people some background on our guest, but I thought it might be helpful for you to give this here, which might give people a bit of an understanding of where you're coming to from this idea of less is more.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in insights and research, actually my entire career. I'm going on 25 years, which gets a little scary when you start to put a 2 in front of it. But I spent the first 20 plus years of my career actually on the supplier vendor side of things. Worked for kind of smaller full service firms. I'm probably one of the 3 buckets. I actually worked at Kantar, so I feel like you either worked at Kantar, you currently work at Kantar, or at some point you will work at Kantar. And in the past 2+ years, I actually moved to, we'll call it the dark side, which is the client side at Woodside Homes. And, you know, when I was on the supplier side, there was just such a focus on volume, getting a lot of research studies done, big PowerPoint decks, pretty dashboards, lots of data. But now that I'm on the client side, your perspective really, really changes. And what I found is I only have so many opportunities to connect with my stakeholders. I only have so many moments to really impact decisions and make insights a value add. And what I found is actually I need to take advantage of those moments. And when I go deeper and I have less information to present them, I can actually have much more of an impact overall.
Yeah, that's cool. So thank you for that background. Why is it you are such a proponent for less data is more? Let's dive into that a bit deeper.
Yeah, you know, from a couple of perspectives. One, just from an insights role perspective, our bandwidth is only so great. There's only so much as a insights professional inside a client that I can even just sort of personally handle and take on. And it's better for me to really get what I call sort of, you know, like an inch wide, a mile deep, and go very deep and have just this really immersive understanding of what some of the business challenges are. And from my stakeholders that I need to serve, you know, when I'm working with them and giving them data and information, that's such a small portion of their day. You know, think about, they have a daily tornado, my marketing team, my product team, my design team. I only get so much time with them. And it's better if I just provide them a few little nuggets and direction that's going to help them do their job better, as opposed to this fire hose of information where at some point they just turn it off and then they have sort of data paralysis. They don't know what to do with it. And so I think I'm at a stage where I'd rather be very, very mindful of their time and also my time. So I really come across as more like an expert in the information that I have, so I can really guide them in a better way.
Yeah, cool. So how does this challenge of having access to too much data fit into the daily responsibilities of decision makers, the end users, I guess, of consumer insights?
Yeah, from the end user, from like my side specifically, it's really being very mindful on, I love research and I love data. So I can easily spend my time, oh, I'd love to do this study, or I'd love to get this piece of information, or can you add this to the dashboard? But I need to present all this information and package it in a way that a non-data user is going to make decisions. And similarly, kind of from their perspective, they really need to have information that's going to help them make a decision. And if I provide all these multiple lenses and all this different data, they're going to turn it off. But if I can provide them 2 or 3 nuggets, it's going to help them. But every day I get calls from vendors about, hey, I can turn this faster, I can turn this quicker, I can give you this piece of information, but is it valuable? Is it going to help them make better decisions? I have to sort of make those trade-offs every time.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess it's not easy. We were promised so much with big data, weren't we? But just, I think you've heard so often, even data lakes turning into data swamps. Like it just becomes almost a paralysis, I guess, of like what's actually important here, what's going to help move the needle. What do you think is the cause of this deluge of data? Why are organizations succumbing to the trap of more?
Yeah, I think there's a few things going on. From the vendor side of marketing research, there are firms that are the DIY, quick, fast, easy. They're sort of the buzzword of agile research. I was on a vendor call the other day where they said, while we're on this 15-minute call, I can get you 100 responses to 3 questions. And I was like, oh, that's great, but what is the validity of that? So you're just going to turn on a survey that's pretty random and people are just going to reply to that. But I think research used to be pretty expensive to take on to do, a full research study. And now obviously with technology, it's a lot cheaper, but it's cheaper better. But a lot of firms have sort of gotten into that space that cheaper, faster is better, more information is better. I think, obviously with info tools, you guys work on the dashboard side, and there's been this proliferation of Power BI, info tools, dashboards, which is great because you can pull disparate sources together, but there's almost been a push of the tech for the sake of it versus what am I trying to answer? And so I think the technology, the number of players in this space, and I think another factor, another sort of, like buzz phrases, let's democratize the data, right? Let's give front end people access to it. And then if we give them access to it, they're going to enjoy working with it. But, those people have everyday jobs, and it's kind of nice to have a shiny new object, but then it gets turned off if it's not answering business questions for them.
Yeah, I think the one way that someone really nicely put it was, we've lost humanity in our workplace, and like it's with market research, it's with marketers, it's with finance. Like we've forgotten the person, the human, and it is that technology focus now, thinking that that'll answer it, but it's not the case. Technology, when it is done right, disappears. and people can go and do what they need to get done without feeling they're using a tool per se. So that's the challenge, and it's a pretty big one as well.
It is a big challenge, and I think that's one of the, the trade-offs that we need to make as insights professionals as a industry, because also we just have access to so much more data, and it's so easy to put it in a dashboard or democratize it or turn it on than ever before. But how do you sift through the noise and really determine what's going to help me make decisions, and what are the different perspectives and data pieces that I need, such that they're not, it's a little bit of a Venn diagram. There's some overlap, but making sure they're not pulling too many things at one point in time that I don't have a story.
For sure. So efficiency, or I guess you could say speed to insight, is obviously in the mindset of many in the industry. After all, no one wants to spend more time on things than they need to, particularly processing data in order to discover insights. So rather than insisting on more data sources or more data in front of us, what should insights professionals be focusing on? Is there another North Star they can direct their attention?
Yeah, I mean, I love like the jobs to be done framework. I know that's another sort of, catchphrase that's out there, but I love to think about what are my stakeholders' pain points that they're dealing with? What are the top 2 or 3 decisions that they need to really make? And what can I deliver to them to really make them champions? And it's less about maybe the sheer volume of data sources, but it's more about how do you package that in a very compelling, connected way. And I think that's still a challenge, and where our industry is grappling with, because we really moved to a place of data dashboards. And some people are doing a great job of now the dashboard telling a story. But if you don't have someone that can really interpret data and make sense of it, then you're kind of left with a pretty dashboard. So I think where we need to go is realize that we need to make business decisions, and data and insights in our profession needs to help inform and be at the beginning of that value chain to help make that decision and make it easier for that stakeholder.
So tell us, what does it look like when brands get consumer insights data right? What does good look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. My boss is the CMO here, or the person I report to, and she has this great phrase when it connects. She goes, "You're either going to make them laugh or you're going to make them cry." And I think about that a lot when I'm trying to, present information, or I get information presented to me. And it's so funny that as research people, we always talk about making an emotional connection with consumers. But I think that we forget that we need to make that same emotional connection with our stakeholders. And when I can put up a number like 65% are satisfied, or I can put up a number of, out of the 3 products, this was the winning one. But I will often intersperse a short video and try to humanize the research and bring it to life. And it's funny that aha moment oftentimes comes more from when they hear something in a consumer's own words that really reinforces that theme. And I also think about, we're only going to retain 1, 2, maybe at max 3 things. And that message sometimes needs to be talked about 4, 5, 6, 7 times and reinforced over and over again. So I think good insights is when you make it gets delivered in a compelling emotional way, when it's kind of limited into that key takeaway or two. And when there's really tells a story and the data is all there to support it, and it's whether it's in an appendix or a dashboard or something else, but you have empowered a stakeholder to almost have that sigh of relief that, oh, now I know where to go. I've got direction, I've got the information behind it, maybe with other pieces that they know and other perspectives. But when they feel that they can move forward, I think those are some of the things that I've found. It's like, okay, this is now impactful and this is valuable.
You've talked quite a lot about stakeholders and also customers. How do you navigate that tension between giving stakeholders what they want versus actually say, look, this is what the customers are wanting to, we need to focus on this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a tough challenge. I actually like the tension, and I think it's important to put things in front of stakeholders that actually might be different than what they think. Because I think sometimes when there is that tension, that's when you get action. When you're just presenting something that gets a lot of head nods, then oftentimes you're not moving the needle or doing something. I will preface my insights at times saying, you know what, this is going to be different, or this might be hard to hear, but we, at least at Woodside, and hopefully it's at other organizations, we have this purpose of enhancing lives. And we start our meetings with that. And we say, look, we all have our own personal biases and ways that we think about things, but the voice of the home buyer is the voice of the home buyer. It may not be what you like to hear. It may be different, but if we can truly understand that, and if we can meet those needs, then we're going to be in a better place as a company and as a brand. But you know, one of the things that I also do a lot with stakeholders, where I know some information might be different, I start kind of feeding them little pieces like, hey, this little nugget came out, or hey, did you know that? So they don't get surprised by it. When I have the opportunity to present, I might present like a short video or a short, hey, X% said this. And then I start to get some buy-in because they're not presented with something so disparate all at one time. You've sort of fed them little breadcrumbs along the way.
Yeah, sure. There's a perception out there, and I touched on this before, that data can just be thrown into a lake and then on-demand insights can just flow out of it. But one problem with this is that data, if it's not preserved in the context that it was gathered, it can be stripped of a lot of its value. Like think of respondent level data being muddied with syndicated data, for instance. And so how are you seeing this issue addressed in the consumer insight space?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are in our home building space in particular, you know, we have a lot of survey-based data at the respondent level. We have all this third-party secondary information as well, in terms of like migration patterns, commute time, you know, sort of how desirable a living space is. And then we have all this, you know, sort of Simmons and MRI data. We have Experian. It is very tough to marry the two together. The way that we try to do it here is when we have a singular research study or an initiative, is we almost kind of cherry pick that syndicated third-party secondary information and try to overlay it where it's additive and there's some synergy there. So I think we focus a little less on maybe trying to marry it all together, but find the use cases where it makes sense. Like an example would be when we're thinking about building some homes in a new community, we might do some really deep respondent level information about what do you think about these homes? What do you think about living in this area? And then we overlay with the intelligence that we have around like the demographics, the purchase behaviors, the purchase patterns, commute times. And we try to just paint a fuller picture and put those together as opposed to pulling those little as disparate pieces of information. It's not easy though. It's a challenge, but I think we try to say, how does this all fit so we can tell a picture? I like to use, I'm not sure if you know pointillism and George Seurat, like the painting, and it's very easy to look at all the individual dots. It's very tough to keep moving back and see the full picture and put it together. And what we try to do here is make it so there's a full picture and a story across those data sources.
No, very true. So we've talked about data and the market research industry, like with its that focus on it. Where do you see then the future of market research going? Where should it be heading towards? What changes do you see being needing to be made in order to get the outcomes for customers and clients?
Yeah, and I'm probably just going to stand on a soapbox here and maybe do some things that maybe people in the industry don't like, but you know, everything that we know from a like behavioral science perspective is that 95% of decisions are made off emotion. I mean, it's just out there, right? I'm not a behavioral economics or a behavioral scientist or a neuroscience, but why in the world do we continue to use the same surveys that we were using 25 years ago when I first started in this industry, let alone 30, 40 years ago? We continue to have these, 10, 15, 20-minute surveys. We ask things on 5 and 10 point scales. We ask people to, take a survey on, their regular computer. Where I see the industry going is really leveraging behavioral science and neuroscience much more, is really understanding the emotional response to products and concepts and services, to using things like implicit response testing. So we're not asking people to rate something on a 10-point scale. We never rate anything on a 10-point scale. We either buy or we don't buy something. Let's start to measure more the emotional connection in the response that somebody has. Another space, we are working with a company called Visit, V-I-Z-I-T, and they are able to process thousands of images using their AI and spit back to us which images are going to be most compelling, are going to have the desired emotional response for our specific target. And there's companies like Visit and iQuant, which are using AI and overlaying like an emotional response. So you don't have to measure single individual research studies or measure like one image or even like one concept at a time. They can take volumes and volumes of that and then give you really specific neuroscience-backed data in direction. And I hopefully see our industry where saying if we want to have a deep human understanding, we need to have our survey tools measure how people actually make decisions. And let's start to take advantage of these more AI-based platforms that look at things on, is something grabbing attention, which is so critical because we have 1.7 seconds to grab attention, and look at the emotional component. And I really see the industry pivoting in that direction. And we have really been leveraging partners in that space, and we're getting better insights and better direction. And there's the human side of it that when we present back to our stakeholders is so incredibly compelling.
Since starting at Woodside Homes, have you noticed a difference in the price point that you're dealing with as well, and that connection to emotion that you mentioned as well at the start of that question?
Price point for the homes, you mean specifically?
Yes. So when you're thinking about FMCG, that's obviously a lot more price driven, and then you you raise up the scale there.
Yeah, certainly for homes in particular, obviously, like we are, the highest involvement decision. There's an incredible amount of financial risk. It's probably the biggest decision that anybody's going to make. It's a longer purchase journey, but it is incredibly emotional. Yes, price matters, right? Because we all have a budget. Obviously, mortgage rates matter. But so much of home buying is somebody walks into that home and they just go, this is the right one for me. They walk into that kitchen and they're like, oh, I can envision life here. That emotional response to this purchase can override a lot of things. And we are trying to really fundamentally understand that emotional decision, because in our industry, there is so much that we can play with. Lighting, what the cabinets look like, what the countertops look like. We are thinking from the perspective, what's the music in the background? What's the smell? Because those are things that impact attention. Those are things that impact memory. And those are things that actually move people to action. And we have a lot more space to play in homes, obviously, than you might in other products and services. But that emotional piece and getting a deep understanding of that, particularly with the risk of getting things wrong for this consumer, but also on the flip side of it, if they make a good decision, this is a decision for their family and what's going to really happen from a long-term perspective.
Yeah, it is a fascinating journey, and some of us are lucky to be able to have been on it, the home buying, that is. I know in New Zealand particularly, our cost of living, our house prices is astronomical. It's upwards of 10 times the average salary now, which I think even in the States it's quite unheard of in a lot of areas. I'm assuming not all.
Yeah, no, it is very challenging, especially, where we live. I mean, to try to get sort of like an entry level or first time buyer, obviously right now there's so many sort of, hurdles and barriers to just, owning a home for the first time. But in the same sense, when somebody can sort of like realize that and you can make it attainable for them, that emotional hook, because this is their life, right? This is where the memories are going to happen, where if they have a family where their kids are going to grow up, where, they're going to have good moments, but it's also where, they're going to have some heartbreaking moments too, right? This is life, and this is where life happens.
So if we just go back quickly to those traditional market survey tools that we have, what do we need to do to make those more user-friendly, more human-centric, to get more value out of them?
Yeah, I think there's some simple things. I mean, I like even just, I don't know that we need scales. Scales are great, right? From the standpoint of, someone wants to do factor analysis or regression, and you get into some of the statistical thing. But I think we can make things simpler in terms of like, Tinder, yes, no, swipe right, swipe left. I think instead of taking people through these like laborious surveys, we've partnered with several neuroscience firms that use implicit testing, and you see a product or you see a service, and it's a more interactive, engaging experience. Like, how does this product make you feel? Anxious, joyful, happy, sad? Like, those are things that are more reflective. So making our surveys more realistic on how we engage on Amazon. Like we buy, we don't buy, we have a feeling, we don't have a feeling, making things much more conversational. So I think it's really easy to just do the standard survey and say, you know, on a 10-point scale, how would you rate? I think we can make our surveys like we would with a text message conversation that we would have with a friend. And why not? Right? Why not say, hey, how are you feeling today? What do you think about this? Oh, that's awesome that you think about this. You know, having the words and the language in the survey be more reflective of like everyday conversation. I know that academics out there and the survey purists might, you know, sort of cast me for doing that, but I think we're getting better and more human responses when we treat respondents like human beings, and we can have more of a conversation with them. And then we're going to get better data because they're going to be more engaged in the survey in and of itself. And I think the last piece is every single one of my studies, all my quant studies, I always have a qual component. I always have like a video element there because it helps bring it to life. So I think this marrying of qual and quant is really critical, especially for stakeholders. So I think if our industry can really continue to yes, have some quantitative data, because we need that, but when you can intersperse some of the qual and you've got some video and you can bring it to life, that's when it can be really even more impactful and more powerful.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, there's just on that point from a marketing perspective, the way that we've operating now has changed considerably. The way people are responding to emails or not responding to them, things getting sent into junk or to spam filters or whatnot. So yeah, there definitely needs to be change from approaches, and from a market insights perspective, like you're at the coalface now and you're seeing the results of how things have been done and you're trying new things, which is fantastic. And I guess the rest of the world will catch up, things will change. And yeah, so thank you for your time and for sharing this. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on before I recap?
You know, I think we covered pretty much everything. I think the only other thing that I will add here in terms of like the industry, I think is sort of the dashboard component too. You guys actually do a really good job of not thinking about a dashboard, but thinking about a story. And I think that's another place, sort of like the evolution, is we got to stop thinking about dashboards for the sake of dashboards. But the dashboard companies, and like yourself and you guys, like I said, do a very good job of how do we present the data in a way that's going to help someone make a decision, and that's story-based and takes the dashboard user through a journey, as opposed to just having something pretty with dials for the sake of doing it. So another piece that came into my mind in a space where I've worked with John Bird at InfoTools, and you guys actually take that, what are the decisions that need to get made? So we create a dashboard that's story-based as opposed to something that's just, you know, pretty and has all the features and functionality.
It is very true. We relate to stories, don't we? They help us to understand and to put a context over what we're seeing. So yes. So thank you for that. If I can just recap quickly, today we've talked about how less is more when it comes to consumer insights data, as organizations and decision makers alike have far too much on their plates to be sifting through and to try and make sense of the fathoms and fathoms of data stored in lakes. We went on a trip down memory lane to explore your journey in the market research and insight space. We discussed how having less data can actually help insights teams and businesses to go deeper into the data and the analyses. We touched on the importance of storytelling to help with this overall understanding and how it can help stakeholders to make the decisions that they need. And you touched on at the end there as well how we need to have the outcome focus on what the actual decision or outcome is we want to make at the start of our research process to actually make sure that going to have that return on investment. We briefly looked at the reasons for the deluge of data we find ourselves in. You mentioned, or we talked about the importance of respecting the context of the data that we bring in, so respondent versus syndicated. We talked about an alternative North Star to quantity of data, which is action, as we just touched on too. I guess there's no point in having the best, most interesting insights in the world if it's just academic or no change or success comes of it. And lastly, we touched on, looked into the crystal ball in terms of what changes do we need to move toward really getting inside the minds of consumers and customers, understanding the system one, implicit data, etc. as well. So it's some really cool things been done in the industry, and you're touching on a lot of them at Woodside, Jason. So keep it up. Really fascinating to see the work that you're doing, and we'll be watching closely as well.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Michael. Really, really appreciated the conversation.
That's all right. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for listening in today. If any listeners out there, we'd really appreciate leaving a review, subscribing to the podcast, or even sharing it with others if you did like what you've heard. Thank you for listening to Now That's Significant.